Yeah, cool. I don't speak any Norwegian yet, so excuse my just English. My name's Sam Bush. I started out about 14 years ago in the industry in a town called Bournemouth on the south coast of the UK. I started off doing my own shows, gigs, concerts after school with indie bands coming from London and DJs, etc. And then I got into management and managed early careers for the likes of Ben Howard, Clean Bandit and a few other acts, and then started getting to more national promoting across the UK, and then started working with brands and selling in kind of music and brand relationships and creating kind of festivals off the back of it. Then I went to AEG, which is a big national promoter in the UK and internationally, for about 4 years. And then I went to a company called Global, which is a media entertainment group in the UK. So they own all the big radio stations, and they wanted to get into festivals and touring. So I went over there and set up that arm, and I was there for 3 years. And then 2 years ago, I moved to Live Nation in London, which is a UK national promoter and an international promoter. And then in April, I moved over to Oslo, to the Live Nation office, where I'm now full-time. And the background behind that is my wife is Norwegian, and we've been coming here for 11 years, very fond of the country and the scene over here. So decided to come over here and try and bring some of the experience I've had over the last sort of 14 years to Norway and help that way. So that's kind of me.
Yeah, so I'm Sally Dunstone. You've got the two Sallys of the live music industry in London here, and we do get emails that are meant for each other quite a lot, don't we? All the time, yeah. Hello. I'm Sally Dunstone. I work at X-Ray Touring, which is one of the biggest booking agencies in the UK. Amongst our roster, we look after the acts including Coldplay, Eminem, Queens of the Stone Age, Blur. Personally, I work across a roster of my own acts. A lot of hip-hop stuff. I do a few indie acts, electronic artists as well, so quite a varied roster. My background, I moved to London from Northern UK when I was 17, did music management and events at university. From there, started working at One Extra and Radio 1, kind of temping and broadcast assisting where I could, and then moved to Live Nation before being at X-Ray for the past 5 years. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And then other Sally.
Thank you. I'm Sally Rafferty, the other Sally. So my background is I'm also from Northern England. I moved to London about 6 years ago to do a music degree. I went to music school. My background is more, I was like more of a songwriter, an artist, so started sort of that way. When I finished my degree, I'd spent a lot of time while I was at uni working as a show rep for promoters in London. So every Friday and Saturday I would be at some little crusty venue in London repping their gigs for them, and just decided that I wanted a career in the live music industry. So left uni, got a job at United Talent Agency, where I helped like generally just assist some of the agents there in the rock department. And then I became a promoter at Crosstown Concerts, which is where I am now. I've been there 3 years, and I'm a national promoter. We do, from tiny clubs to stadiums. Got a couple of festivals. I've got my own roster, work with mainly new acts, a lot of guitar bands, but a little bit of pop. Yeah, that's me.
Thank you. I thought it'd be quite good to maybe get a steer in the room of the mixture of kind of maybe managers, aspiring managers, labels, or promoters. So it would be interesting to see if you could put your hands up if you're working more in the live space. Is there anyone in the live space here? Promoting live? No? Just us? Managers? Any managers? Okay. Any labels? Publishers? Cool. So we've got a good spectrum. Any artists or aspiring artists? Okay, great. So I thought it'd be quite, collectively thought it'd be quite useful to maybe give an overview of how the UK live market is built up, focusing more on the touring side of things to start with, because obviously there's local promoters, which is how I started off, and probably we all started off doing gigs in our hometown and then moving up to national. So maybe Sally to my right, if you could maybe start off of just kind of giving a bit of an overview of the landscape in terms of promoters, agents, relationships, how that all kind of works.
So I'm going to start this pretty base, just from grassroots level. So in terms of agents and promoters, we have national promoters and local promoters in the UK. National promoters would include Live Nation, SJM, AEG, and they'll work on a national level. We also have local promoters, for example, Future Sound, that would just operate in Leeds and surrounding areas. A lot of the more national promoters, for example, Crosstown have an office based in Bristol. So, in that area, Crosstown are particularly strong. SJM, they're really strong in Manchester, and that's where their office is based. In terms of agency, I'm trying to think of an exception, but I think pretty much all the major agencies at least are based in London, in the UK. There's a few people spotted around, but that's where the main offices are. We, agents and promoters, work closely together. Obviously, agents would route the tours and deal directly with the managers, and then we'd kind of be the intermediary between the act manager, agent, then promoter, and the promoter will deal largely with the venues. So that's kind of the chain of how everything works as standard. Obviously, there's always exceptions, but that tends to be the main route. I think that in terms of how we work together, in terms of promoters and agents, you kind of, as an agent, you'll find the promoter that you feel would work best with that certain act. They might be particularly strong in a certain genre or a certain area of the UK, and I think that's kind of part of the reason how we find each other. And, sometimes you just find people you get along with, don't you? So you tend to have those relationships and work quite closely together. Do you have anything to add on to that?
More just like I suppose the difference between a local promoter and a national promoter, as we've just said. Sometimes things will go to the local promoters if it depends what act it is, like you said. Usually when it's a kind of early on, it might go to all local promoters, is that fair to say? And then maybe as the act gets a bit more established, they'll then look to national promoters.
Yeah, I think as well, a lot of it depends on the kind of act you're working with. A lot of the time, if you're working with American acts, sometimes managers prefer to work with an AEG or a Live Nation because obviously they have offices in the States and they have those connections there already. Also, I think Sam will probably agree with this, festival portfolio has quite a lot to do with sometimes how agents will navigate choosing promoters as well. But yeah, I think in a nutshell, that tends to cover the major
relationships.
relationships.
Between the two.
Yeah.
Essentially, the agent will speak to the management. Like you said, sometimes the manager might have a relationship outside of the UK where they want to work with a certain promoter, or the agent kind of advises which promoter they think are best based on, you know, obviously the factors that you've said. But yeah, generally it's a kind of relationship business, so you just try and build those relationships and trust.
And then I guess as well, sometimes there'll be co-pros.
Yeah.
So, for example, like Sally said, if you had that regional promoter in place, when they get to a level where they need a national promoter, it would be the kind thing to do to have it as a co-pro. So you're not just having someone's hard work early doors just, you know, cast aside when they've put the work in, when they've not necessarily been making a mass amount of money. Yeah. So I think that's always quite fair, isn't it?
No, definitely. And there are a lot of acts in the UK that they'll put up a tour of maybe 15, 20 shows, and you look on the poster and there'll be like 5 or 6 promoters on there. Some are independent, some say Live Nation, some say SJM, some say Crosstown, some say DHP. So it's always interesting when you look at artwork, always look at the bottom, because, yeah, like you said, some agents decide to split it up. Some agents prefer just to have one promoter nationally. So yeah, I think, like you said, it very much depends on the genre itself. That kind of leads us into why UK is, you know, a very important market for not just UK artists, but, you know, international artists from UK, America. Why do we personally think that, you know, a lot of these artists domestically and internationally want to tour the UK so much? And often when you're routing a tour as an agent, why would the UK and Germany, for example, be the first ones that the acts want to look at?
Yeah, I guess in terms of why the UK is such a stronghold in Europe, a lot of the agencies are based there, like I mentioned earlier. The offices for the major labels and a lot of the indie labels, that the bigger indies that do really well, are also based in London. Also, in terms of routing tours, you can cover quite a lot of ground in the UK. Like, you can do Manchester, Glasgow, London, Birmingham, and they're all, say, a couple of hours drive within each other. Whereas, like I was saying earlier, when you get to routing a tour and it gets to Scandinavia, obviously it's a lot further drive than, say, a London to Manchester, for example. So I think, yeah, like, the amount of ground that you can cover in the UK is quite a big pointer on that.
And we were saying before, I don't know if you can maybe touch on it, Sally, like kind of different genres have maybe different, not priorities, but we're saying like the indie bands and their kind of attitude towards, even at a small level, at 100 capacity clubs and stuff. Maybe you could touch on that.
So yeah, in the sort of indie genre and guitar bands, which I mainly work with, they just want a gig, and they need a gig because they need to get out there, they need to perfect their craft, they need to reach fans. So often they'll be willing to, you know, go and do an extensive tour, but it might be to, you know, small cap rooms, but there'll be a few people there, and it's kind of understood and it's accepted that that's just the way it is. They've got to, you know, they've got to start somewhere, and they've got to lay those foundations and build on it, and, you know, revisit these territories and go back and back again, and hopefully, you know, and it works, and it has worked for a lot of you know, successful indie bands now. But as Sally Dunstone was saying, she works with a lot of hip hop acts, and it's a lot different, isn't it?
I mean, in terms of with the indie bands as well, I think that getting out and playing, even if you're playing a festival for a few £100 early on, it's important as you as an artist to get out there, be in the backstage, meeting people, like meet the other bands, make friends with the other bands, because that's how you're going to start getting really good tour supports and get a little bit of a scene going. And I think that's another reason why touring a lot is quite important for those kind of acts. Whereas working with bigger hip-hop acts from the States, they often will make a lot more money in the States per show than they will over here. So they might not really think it's that worthwhile or viable to begin with to leave the States and come over here. But also, you know, in terms of that, you would then probably come over and do a London, Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels run to begin with, and then follow it up with festivals across Europe afterwards. I mean, mainly because for example, in these markets, the venue that you're going to play is going to be bigger than, say, you know, you're going to play a bigger venue in London than you would in Manchester and Glasgow, because those markets can often take a little bit longer for the music to really resonate. So I think a lot of the time it is genre-led in terms of what markets you'll play.
And you touched on fees there, in terms of, say you've got a new artist from Norway coming over looking to do 100 to 200 capacity venues in the, you know, Manchester, Birmingham, Bristol, those sorts of cities. What sort of venues could they expect to play? Like, you know, just if you could maybe, Sally, give a couple of examples of some of those sorts of venues, like, you know, is there production included in those venues? You know, can they get a couple £100 and anything else, just to give a kind of overview?
Yeah, I mean, mainly in these sort of 100, 150 cap venues across the UK, you'll expect a fee of about 100, maybe 150 quid, probably max, yeah.
And a ticket price of?
Yeah, and a ticket price probably, I don't even know.
£10,
yeah, something like that. Obviously, you'll get beers, water, production will be included. Yeah, that's the norm, I suppose. Yeah.
And I'm going to jump ahead a bit, but just when we're talking at that level in terms of venues, and it kind of maybe goes with festivals, we were talking earlier about finding the right time to play these tours, because I think a lot of people go, okay, great, we want to go and tour the UK, you know, play these 100 capacities, it'll be easy to sell it out. But actually, when it comes to it, you know, it's not always easy to sell 100 tickets, even in these major markets. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we maybe want to touch on.
Yeah, it's so important to time it right on when's the right time to come over. Yeah, if you know, too early, you could, you know, miss potential fans that might have come a little bit further along the line once you've released more music or whatever. And also another thing to touch on, I think that if there is success in the UK and you are picking up fans, people are coming to the shows, I think it's important not to leave it too long before you come back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to, you know, come over, have a really good run, and then come back again in, you know, 4 or 5 years' time when, you know, they're all looking at a different act now. You know, they're excited about someone else. Yeah, I think that's pretty important.
No, it's true. When you've got momentum, you just want to keep going back.
Yeah, you got to keep,
Whether it's festivals or whether it's...
Yeah.
And for, you know, if you're a Norwegian manager or, you know, an artist, what would you say would be the best way to try and break into, you know, either finding an agent or finding a promoter or trying to get onto festivals? Is there anything that you could recommend in terms of a good way to start for new acts? And
I mean, it's all about relationships, isn't it? You know, that's how we get work done, I suppose. It's all about meeting people and connecting with people to then move forward and hopefully work with them. I think it's as simple as that. I think it's about getting on with people and, you know, having a common interest and knowing what the other person likes musically. Yeah, I think that's the best way to start. Yeah.
I think it's always hard to know exactly when it's the right time to come to not just the UK but internationally, because music now is consumed in a way that it's instant. And you know, I've had artists that I've promoted in the UK, and there's stats on, you know, on Spotify are billions of streams and this and that, and we struggle to sell 200 tickets in London. And I can have another act that's streaming way less, lot less social engagement, but the audience that they've got is much more engaged, and they're buying tickets for a higher price and selling more tickets. So it's quite a difficult question to know when is the right time. I think obviously the obvious Norwegian artist recently that I think has done a kind of perfect campaign is Sigrid, because from a UK perspective, I think she's kind of come in, she's come in and played those small clubs, 200-300 capacities, 10 dates across the UK, sold them out, come back, serviced the demand, and moved up in the right stages, played the right festivals at the right time, picked the right slots at those festivals, and obviously now is on the verge of an arena act in the UK on the next album cycle, which having had a couple of years in the industry, it's a pretty amazing campaign, and she's just going to carry on going that way. So I think she's we'll touch on festivals in a minute, but there are certain festivals I think that are kind of good to play as well. Moving back to kind of newer artists, where do you find your acts that you work with and that you sign and that you promote? Maybe from an agent's perspective first, and we can go on to promote.
It's quite a broad question, really, because there's so many avenues in which that I find new acts. Often, sometimes a promoter will tip me on it. I'll have A&Rs tip me on things. I work closely with a lot of American agents, so they might pass me things that are really hot on the ground there, and vice versa. Also, looking at online blogs, keeping an eye on stuff like Hype Machine, just kind of what's aggregating on blogs and stuff like that is super important. Often we'll have artists that we work with that will suggest other artists they're connected with, or labels will suggest as well. So a lot of avenues, really, of how we do find acts. And I think in terms of the landscape that we work on at the moment with streaming, etc., there are so many acts than ever before. So I think, obviously, bear in mind that we're so open with streaming and things, it does open a lot of doors to other markets that, it might have taken quite a while to filter through to at first. But I mean, in terms of kind of cold calling agents and emailing agents just like constantly, I think often it's good to have your own buzz around you and build your own buzz in your own scene, and then we'll notice you. Not to say that don't contact us, because I personally listen to everything that I get sent. But it's always exciting when you notice something that's really popping on a certain scene, or I came to Belam a couple of years ago, and there was like a certain few acts that everyone was talking about. Same with those Tastemaker festivals like Great Escape, Live at Leeds, Dot to Dot, Hit the North, those kind of multi-venue festivals in the UK. Often, like, if there's an act that doesn't have an agent that's super buzzy, you'll find like a lot of agents in the room, and probably promoters as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's probably a good opportunity maybe for us to list out those kind of key tastemaker new artist festivals, because a lot of people know Great Escape, but yeah, maybe Sally, if you want to touch on some of the others I think are useful for people to know, that especially from a UK perspective, from agents, promoters, festival bookers, important ones.
Live at Leeds, Dot to Dot, Hit the North, which is in Newcastle. Is there any other ones?
Liverpool Sound City.
Oh yeah, Liverpool Sound City, that's a good one.
Stag and Dagger in Glasgow.
Stag and Dagger. There's quite a few of them, and it's good because, as we said, it's a sort of tastemaker festival. A lot of new acts go there. It's multi-venue. They do pretty well.
I'd say they're probably the best events to be not seen at, but almost, because often there's festival bookers in the room, there's labels in the room, there's agents in the room, there's all sorts of people, and things can kind of happen quite quickly. I mean, if you look at Great Escape, for example, there's a lot of acts that have kind of really kicked on off a good slot at Great Escape.
Yeah.
And then they come back 3 or 4 years later and kind of do a underplay show there. And
Yeah.
recently, Lewis Capaldi's one of them. There's lots of those.
Neighbourhood in Manchester.
Yeah.
That's a really good example. Yeah.
And as Sally said as well, that it's a good opportunity for artists to meet other artists and establish relationships with them, these sort of things. Often it's kind of like back-to-back, quick changeovers, so there's a lot of time to, meet people and bump into people.
I think those events are quite refreshing as well, because with the way that music's moving in terms of technology, a lot of it's becoming kind of stat-based. So it's like, okay, how many streams have you got in this? Whereas actually, when you're in and around those events and you see bands hanging out and shouting each other out on Facebook, great set from this person, and using each other's backline, actually that kind of brings it back to what we all love and what we all kind of do. So that's a kind of nice, important factor as well. And kind of without selling the jobs that we do, why do we think it's important for artists to work with agents and promoters rather than try and potentially do a show themselves or come to the UK and try and set up their own shows? Is there anything you would say why it's important to have a team, a live team around you?
It's nice to have a support network, isn't it, I suppose, and a team that all works together to ultimately help the artist. There's more ideas in the pot. There's more people working towards the same goal, which ultimately, that has to be better, And obviously things just run more smoothly if you've got people that's their job. Like, it's my job as a promoter to, make sure that everything is in order and that we ultimately promote the show and sell the tickets. That's my full-time job. So yeah, I think it's important to have different people on board who are able to offer you a service, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also in terms of if you're a new artist, having, particularly in London, when you might have a bunch of A&Rs coming to see your show, you want to make sure that you're in the right venue, that's the right look, that, if you're an electronic act, some of the indie venues aren't going to work for you. So it's very difficult to know that, having maybe only been to that certain city once or twice before, whereas your agent and promoter will know the best venues and the venues that have the right feel that you should be playing. So I think that's super important, especially on like the first runs, and building it up that way.
And I think as well, with live music, often that kind of nowadays can start kicking off before a lot of the radio play and all that kind of stuff. And I think what I've seen anyway, if you've got a good agent involved, then that quite often gives confidence to all the other areas of the kind of team, from the record label to the publisher to everybody, so it's going to go, well, this is the agency, we've got X-Ray involved and they look after all these acts. It's more likely that artist is going to potentially be able to get on a big tour as a tour support and, get some good festival slots. So again, it helps if you get a good agent involved or an agency. It can really, I think, putting my old manager's head on, I think can really help.
And I think in general, I'm sure booking a festival, you'll agree, it's quite difficult if you don't have an agent to break through into those big greenfield festivals. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, we seldom, I still work on a festival in the UK called the Isle of Wight, and it would be quite seldom that you'd book an act without an agent. Not because you wouldn't book an act, but just generally everything's done through the agents.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of, for many reasons really, I guess a lot of acts are taking agents on earlier than ever before. Mainly because I guess there's more acts and there's more agents.
And there's more festivals, there's more opportunities across. I mean, I look at Norway now and how many, I think it's actually, don't quote me on this, but I think it's got the most festivals per head than anywhere else in Europe. Like when I look like from Oslo itself, how many festivals in Oslo, and then all the way down to Kristiansand and the other side, and then it's just, there's so many festivals. So you need to get somebody there to help navigate when to play those festivals, what sort of festivals is right to maybe take a bit less money but get a better slot, and all those sorts of things. And obviously all the things like contracting and the different taxes and all that kind of stuff.
All the fun admin stuff.
All the fun stuff, yeah. And in terms of like the festival landscape in the UK. Obviously, there's lots of different types of festivals, big festivals, small festivals, tastemaker festivals. If you could maybe between you both kind of give a bit of an overview of the different festivals in the UK, and you know, the obvious ones, and if you're a new act looking to play them, you know, which ones you should try and look at, and those sorts of things.
Yeah. It's quite a big question because there's so many festivals,
question.
isn't there?
Yeah.
There's always more and more every year. But I guess the core ones would be Reading and Leeds for hip hop, wireless. It's just like, I'm
There's
just kind of
lots.
like mind
Yeah,
blown.
yeah.
I'm thinking of them all in my head now. But yeah, I think as well, when you look at the kind of fees you'll be getting if you're coming over from Norway early doors, it's like we were saying earlier, important to hit these festivals at the right time, because otherwise you could be playing a super early set and there might not be a huge amount of people there, because, you know, as a person going to a festival as a punter, it's very unlikely I'm going to get there for doors. And I think there's only probably Reading and Leeds people go for doors, and maybe wireless.
Yeah.
But other than that, people kind of take their time, go a little bit late, and maybe have a few drinks at the pub first. So when I'm sorting out slots for my artists, I'm always considering that, how many people are actually going to be on site and be on the ground at that time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think in terms of the more niche festivals, you might be, if you're a particular genre-led artist, for example, maybe more of like an acoustic act, doing End of the Road and Green Man's probably going to be a lot more beneficial to you than doing Reading and Leeds, because it's that kind of music and it's that kind of genre. So I think looking at it as an act going over to the UK, it's kind of case-by-case basis, really, in terms of whether that festival is really worthwhile. Do you have anything to add to that?
There's just so many festivals, isn't there?
I think, yeah, it's the same principle to here. You know, there's a lot of festivals here, there's a lot of festivals in the UK, and it's just very much picking the right festivals at the right time. Yeah. And obviously making sure, you know, you have an agent that looks at who's playing before you, who's playing after you. Because if you're a pop act, and I've seen it before, I haven't booked it, but I've seen it where I've turned up and then there's a pop act in between like two heavy metal acts, and you've kind of got an act that walks on stage and goes, okay, there's just a bunch of metalheads in front of me, what the hell am I supposed to do? And then they come off stage, they're super unhappy in the whole thing. So yeah, I think
and I guess as well, in terms of as an agent, you always look at probably 2 years in advance, depending on the size of the act. Just because, like you were saying earlier, festivals aren't likely to, you know, it's quite rare that festivals will book the same acts 2 years in a row, just for obvious reasons of repetition, etc. So unless, you know, you mentioned a couple of examples earlier to me, which is like Jerry Cinnamon you had playing.
That's a good point, yeah.
And, you know, he played lower down the bill, but it's completely blown up, so he'll be back again now. Whereas, you know, I'll always be thinking, if we play this festival next year, these are the festivals that we need to play next year, just so that, you know, there's plenty left in the market.
It's an interesting point, actually, we didn't touch on earlier, because although, you know, the UK obviously consists of Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and obviously England, and obviously when you're routing tours, you know, you've got to cater for all of those, and you might be slightly stronger in Scotland than you are in England, and some artists will want to come in and do what we call the spine tour, which is like London, Birmingham, Manchester and Glasgow, and then come back and do other cities. But maybe touch on, you guys made a good point on the kind of Scottish scene, for example, and, you know, how certain acts over there can be selling a lot of tickets really quickly, and maybe some of those examples, and then they're not worth as much tickets in in England, but they'll still come through and do those tours.
Yeah, I think in terms of Scotland, they have promoters like DF that are really strong over there, and good supporters of the local scene. I think Glasgow in general at the moment has a super strong scene, which All the bands help each other and get on really well. And we're starting to see, acts like the Snuts are really strong in Scotland. And in Scotland, they are really strong supporters of their domestic scene. So an act might break out of Scotland and then move down into the wider UK. But, with Lewis Capaldi's and Jerry Cinnamon, Snuts, there's a lot of amazing acts coming out of there at the moment, and people, like I say, building their own scenes, which I think is super important. When I was growing up in Barnsley, which is near Sheffield, we had Arctic Monkeys, the Cribs, and we all kind of had a scene together, which, that's a good way of starting to break out of your local area and getting recognised elsewhere.
Yeah. Do you have any? Yeah. But that, I mean, sorry. Go on. It's good, like we said, it's good to establish a scene amongst the type of genre that you're in. And then, that's just such a great point to start from, innit? Because people will look and people will, pay attention to what's going on and, and will help you bring that to other parts of the UK. We see it all the time, don't you? I mean, even now there's still some acts that, that they might be worth an arena in Newcastle, but they're still doing a Brixton in London, for example, the Cartooners or something.
Based.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're coming towards the end of a lot of the general questions, but I thought we would address the elephant in the room, Brexit. And if anyone's got any good ideas, get in touch with Boris, because I think he needs some. But maybe we can just kind of touch on from a UK perspective. Obviously, none of us have any knowledge as to exactly what's going to happen, but we can kind of maybe give you what we think might happen in terms of for acts coming into the UK, and obviously UK acts going into Europe. Personally, I think acts coming into the UK, so for Norwegian artists coming in, I don't think there's going to be any problems, because there's no reason for the UK to suddenly put up a barrier to stop artists coming in, and taxes and tariffs and visas. I don't think that's going to be a major problem, but I think for UK acts going across Europe, I think it's a big problem. And the problem now, as you said before, you go onto the government website and there's no answers. It's just just carry on as normal. And I think for a lot of new artists, it's kind of scary. So I don't know if you guys want to touch on talking about maybe the newer artists going across Europe and the bigger artists, and the difference the impact it'll have differently on the bigger artists and the newer artists.
Yeah, so I guess, like you say, none of us are really exactly sure how this is going to pan out at the moment. So in terms of for touring acts, I think it's definitely going to impact the more grassroots level artists, because the costs of touring are likely to rise. I think it's going to be quite difficult in terms of visas, taxes, things like carnets that you're already as an act you'd have to pay. I think it's something like 350 quid or something, which is kind of like all your merchandise and equipment that is like an itemised list of all your equipment that's going in and out of different countries. If you have to do that for every European country that you enter, the admin is just going to be insane. Also, if you have to do work permits or visas for every European country that you enter, that's, as an agency, we'd probably have to hire extra numbers of staff just to be keeping up with that admin load, which obviously is going to be very expensive for agents, for artists. In terms of taxes, I was saying earlier, as a North American agent, for example, you're working across all one tax rate because you're working in one country. Already in Europe, every country has a different withholding tax or tax rule, which, we can navigate. but then with that and the visa stuff on top, and everything else, it's just going to be a bit of a
minefield.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right word. And I think as well, you know, at the moment, as we don't really have any hard and fast answers on how things are going to roll out, it's really difficult to feed back to our artists. You know, like the government website, they give some advice for touring acts, but it's very vague, really vague. So then artists are asking us questions, but as an artist, as an agent, artist, promoter, manager, we don't really have the answers yet. So I think we're just going to have to be hoping that we'll find a way, a way to figure it out, really. But I think it's just a shame that ultimately it's going to be the more emerging acts that are put off from touring earlier on, because if you're getting €500 fee, for example, already you're taking out sometimes your costs from that, accommodation costs, travel costs, etc. If you're then having to do visas, extra paperwork,
taxes,
it's just, and it's just going to be, to begin with as well, I think it takes a while for everyone to understand how things will work, and every country will have different rules, and just gathering a central kind of database of all those kind of rules and regulations is going to take some time. So yeah, if we have to do work permits for every country, it's just going to be so chaotic and problematic.
Hopefully it won't happen, but who knows. Is there anything else? Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And yeah, just really to see, hopefully that's kind of given a quick overview of the UK market. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions or anything, feel free to ask. If not, don't know. Yeah, if there's any questions on the industry or any Norwegian acts in particular, or experiences you've had coming into the UK that you found difficult. I don't know.
I'll open up. I have a question about Norwegian music in the UK, and especially for Sally Dunstone, who works with, as you said, a lot of hip-hop acts. We've seen some examples of Norwegian artists in the indie world who's been sort of successful lately, and in the pop world. But in the UK, you guys, with the local hip-hop, it's quite strong with drill and grime and everything that's going on. Do you think that there's could be an interest for that type of music from outside of the UK?
Yeah, in general, I think that domestic hip hop, in like French hip hop's doing well domestically at the moment. UK hip hop, drill, etc. is doing really well in the UK. I think it takes some time though before those kind of artists resonate across Europe. I mean, I'm not quite sure how big, like, the bigger acts are out here, Skepta, Stormzy, but I imagine they're nowhere near on a level that they would be in the UK. I guess that's because it's quite...
Yeah, it's quite, although it's starting to, I think an act like Stormzy over here now, I mean, the room will know better than me, but it feels like that might be the first artist in that genre that could actually get to an arena over here.
Yeah.
And the other acts are starting to follow through, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it is quite difficult for artists of that genre to break out of UK and start hitting that level, just because it is quite a UK-centric subject base, really, isn't it? And that scene in general. But as we're starting to get more collaborations with other acts, and you know, we're seeing acts in London just absolutely flying at the moment. You know, like Crepton Conan are doing an O2, D Block Europe are doing 2 Alexandra Palaces, and like AJ Tracy's as well. So I think we'll start to see knock-on effects on that soon. Yeah. I do think the collaboration aspect is quite important in terms of getting radio play and things like that, which when you're hitting constant radio play, that does make a big difference.
Yeah, because obviously Sigrid's had some, I keep using Sigrid just because it's a fresh, successful example, but you look at some of the collaborations she's had or certain remixes that she's had's really helped her kind of kick on in the UK. And obviously there's a lot of Norwegians and Scandinavians that live in the UK. I mean, I look at the poster for Ina Roldsen, you know, she just sold out her first show in the UK. You know, and there's lots of, I feel like there's lots of good Norwegian acts coming through. And you go to those early shows, and it's not just kind of the Norwegian community in London or Manchester going. Actually, it's branching out even earlier. You know, look at Le Metre or a lot of those acts. So I think, you know, there's always appetite, but like you said, features is a really good way to get in. And you see now a lot of so if you take hip hop for example, Drake spends a lot of time when he comes in the UK. Obviously, he doesn't need to, but he'll pull the hottest new grime hip hop acts in the UK, and he'll turn up at their shows to 200 people, and he'll bring them on stage at their festivals because, he doesn't really need to, but it gives him credibility. It shows that he cares about the market, and I think you can apply that not just to that genre or that artist, but right across the spectrum, really. So, yeah. Any other questions, or I think that's it. Okay.
In terms of artists,
Just for the stream.
I just wanted to understand, like, the artists from like really different genres, right? Say, and culturally different, right? In terms of sound. So, say, artists who want to like make it big in Norway, but then they write songs in complete Norwegian or like in some strange accent from the north or something. How much is the acceptance in the UK market for that? So, folk Norwegian artists or indie Norwegian artists who stick to the local languages and stuff. How's their market in the UK?
Just from my perspective, I would say the UK as a whole is very accepting to, you know, different music from different languages. Obviously, there's a ceiling on how big. Well, you could say that, but then you look at K-pop and you see BTS who sing all in Korean, and they've just, you know, selling out stadiums across the UK and multiple arenas. So that's kind of, I think, a little exception. But in terms of maybe more folk genre, I would say it's more difficult. I mean, I worked with, not in that genre, but a Brazilian artist called Anita, who is huge in South America, does like stadiums in there. And we did her show in London. We sold out the Royal Albert Hall. 99% of her audience was South American. And her route now is she's just done a collaboration with J Balvin and Rita Ora. So again, all of her stuff was, she had one song in English in the whole set. And obviously that community came to the show. But she still sold that show out. But now to get to the next level, she's going to try and, you know, do some collaborations, do more English-speaking songs. So I think it's definitely possible to sell tickets. But I think it's, to get to the next level, I would say you kind of need to.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, definitely.
But as a society, I think it's, the great thing about the UK is it's very acceptance to all genres, to, you know, and quite often people like the fact that it's not in English because it's something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yes, I have one last question, or if there's no other questions from the crowd. Sally Rafferty, you've worked with Norwegian acts, or you currently are working with a Norwegian act in London. Do you have any, is there anything that you've noticed where there's a difference between, say, a UK act or a Norwegian act? Like, is there a notable difference? Is there something that we should take note of, or is there anything that we're good at, or, you know, do you have any advice?
I mean, specifically the act that I'm working with at the moment, I work with Pompoko, the Norwegian experimental punk band. They have a lot of energy, and they can put some British bands to shame because they're amazing live. They give a lot, and yeah, I don't know if that's obviously specific to their genre, but it's gone really well for them in London. All of the shows we've kept them small so that they've, you know, sold really well. Haven't upgraded any venues. We did a Shacklewell, Lexington, and now we've got a Scala coming up in a couple of weeks' time, which is, yeah, it's a 700 cap, it's called. Yeah, so I work with them. They're doing pretty well. But in terms of the differences between them and a British act, I don't know of a British act that's that similar to them, but only because, you know, they're pretty different, and they've got a lot of energy. And that's not something that I've particularly seen who's similar to them at the minute.
So I think that concludes our panel, and I'd like to thank you guys again very much for coming out from London, and for you who arrived after we've started. If you want to check out these people's workplaces, Sally Rafferty works with Crosstown Promotions, and Sally Dunstone is with X-Ray Touring, and Sam Bush is with Live Nation. And yeah, thank you guys so much for coming out. Thank you.